On a lush spring day, a man had planned to take a small flight across California's Sierra Nevada with his pilot friend and his partner, when a sudden work arrangement came up, meaning that there was a free seat on the plane. The man's girlfriend was free, so she took his spot and set off into the ranges. They were just about to make it over one of the peaks of Mount Bradley when a sudden downdraft caused the plane to crash straight into the ground, leaving them stranded at 12,500 feet. If you're new around here, my name's Ryan from Tragedy Tales. Without hesitation, this is the tragic ordeal on Mount Bradley. The Sierra Nevada Mountains is a mountain range in the western United States, sitting between the Central Valley of California and the Great Basin. The Sierra runs with its crest and high peaks for a total of 400 miles from north to south. The peaks range from 11,000 to 14,000 feet above sea level, with Mount Whitney at 14,494 feet. Much of the rock is granite or a near relative of granite. Now, these ranges stand out due to their unique sites of wonder, such as the all-famous General Sherman, the largest single-stem tree in the world by volume. Not to forget the largest alpine lake in North America, Lake Tahoe. But this story revolves around a young woman named Lauren. Lauren was born in Portland, Oregon, and moved almost every year with her family during her dad's career in the Navy. Lauren later worked as a counsellor for people with mental health conditions while establishing herself as a professional artist in the Bay Area. Lauren's partner had planned to go out on a small, non-commercial flight across the vast Nevada mountain range with his longtime veterinarian and pilot friend Jay, along with Jay's partner, Jean. The aim of the flight was to take photos of the Sierra Mountains, followed by a picnic at Death Valley, returning home later in the day. As far as I can tell, this flight should take around 6 hours there and back. So, on April the 26th, 1976, it was a wonderfully sunny day, perfect for the picnic, and 29-year-old Lauren unexpectedly found herself at the Oakland International Airport after a work arrangement popped up, meaning that her partner couldn't make it. So without a second thought, Lauren hopped on the plane in just a blouse, wraparound skirt, and 2-inch heel boots. Armed only with her camera, she wanted to take pictures of the picturesque ranges and to see the beauties with her own eyes. The plane itself was a red and white single-engined Cessna 182, and the pilot, Jay, who was 36 years old, had 213 flight hours under his belt, but only 46 on this particular type of aircraft. It's also worth noting that he was also not yet instrument rated, meaning that he couldn't solely navigate the aircraft just by looking at the instruments, and relied on visual references. More alarmingly, however, it seems that Jay had little to no mountain flying experience. Sudden weather changes and high altitudes make it much more difficult than normal flying, especially in a small aircraft. It can be very difficult to gauge scale and distance. But most dangerous of all is the constant downdrafts and updrafts. In a small aircraft with little speed, upward drafts can cause the plane to very suddenly gain altitude, and downward drafts, they can come out of nowhere and can cause the plane to nosedive. This can be a thrill for those in the aircraft, but it can also be very dangerous if it hits at the wrong time. That morning, Ray checked the weather conditions and they remained perfect. He put the key in the ignition and they set off. They began to climb altitude and the beauty of the ranges became immediately clear. Lauren was sat in the back with Jean, Jay's girlfriend, in the passenger seat. She soon unplugged her seatbelt and began taking breathtaking photos of the ranges. And as they were soaring through the air, they were being hit by updrafts and downdrafts. The pilot saw these as a bit of fun. He was having the time of his life, whipping and dodging the plane through the valleys, flying pretty dangerously for someone who had very little mountain flying. All was going smoothly, and this is when the time came to cross one of the peaks at Mount Bradley into the jaw-dropping Kearsarge Pass below. The ridge was approximately 12,500 feet, and they were cruising at around 12,850. They came up to the ridge, and this is when a fun day out turned into absolute horror. The ridge got closer and closer, and it was looking like they were just about going to make it. But this is when a sudden downward draft caused the plane to nosedive. Lauren looked forward to see them going full speed, straight towards a wall of granite. And when she came to, her vision adjusted. She was still sitting in the back of the plane, but it was now crumpled and partially ripped in half. Lauren crawled out of the tail of the plane, and Jay was already standing up. It was clear that he had sustained severe injuries himself. He was bleeding profusely from a wound on his head. They both realized that the plane was now lying on a very dangerous slope, pretty much at the top of the mountain, just 15 feet away from the summit, at an altitude of 12,460 feet, 1.5 miles south of Mount Bradley. They checked and they had little to no supplies on the plane. They had some water, but the food for the picnic was gone. They had no spare clothing, and the situation looked very, very bad. Lauren and the pilot worked together to pull his girlfriend out of the wreckage, to discover that she was unconscious. She had sustained a severe head injury and a large slash on her face. Lauren was also pretty injured in the crash herself. She'd lost the majority of her front teeth, her arm was very badly broken, and she had a deep foot injury. The pilot began to complain of stomach pain, indicating that he was bleeding internally. The pair agreed that they would have to wait for rescue. The first thing they did was gather fuel dripping off the wing of the plane and used it to light a fire for warmth. Jay sat down by the fire, reportedly looking confused and disoriented. I can only imagine what must have been going through his head, knowing that he was the one piloting the plane, believing it may well be the death of all of them. They sat there for some time, while Jean lay unconscious in the snow. She was groaning and clearly in a lot of pain. When out of the blue, she convulsed and her body began shaking violently. And before anyone could reach her, sadly, she slipped down the mountain into the rocky highlands below. Hours passed on the mountain ridge and no rescue was in sight. Soon, Jay started getting weaker and weaker, telling Lauren that he, and I quote, did a dumb thing, really dumb. I should have circled. I should have made another approach to gain altitude. There were downdrafts. By 6 p.m, dread began to build for Lauren's boyfriend when she did not return home as expected. He quickly made calls to airfields and search and rescue groups to report her missing. Before long, the sun went down and temperatures plummeted. The winds began to pick up and it completely blew out the fire, their only heat and light source. When it went out, they knew they needed to keep warm, so with their bare hands, they grabbed all of the hot rocks and moved them to the tail end of the plane, where they both crawled in and tried to survive the night. They somehow managed to get to sleep, but at some point in the morning, Jay suddenly awoke and began to throw his arms around, punching the wall and banging his head against the inside of the plane. He soon stopped and they huddled back together to sleep. Now this was most likely the cold beginning to set in. In moderate hypothermia, shivering stops and confusion increases. And in acute hypothermia, symptoms include hallucinations and paradoxical undressing, where a person unclothes themselves believing that they are boiling hot. On Tuesday, April the 27th, around 2:30 a.m, the Federal Aviation Administration issued an alert and 11 pilots with the Civil Air Patrol and Air Force Rescue were in the air looking for the 3 missing people. Around dawn, when Lauren awoke, she turned to see that Jay had uncovered himself in the night and exposed himself to the cold. He had frozen to death. He had his eyes wide open and she just stared, believing that it would be her next. This left Lauren alone on the top of a mountain, not knowing whether or not rescue was even coming, with no supplies, in high-heeled boots and a skirt. A truly hopeless situation. The sun started to peek its head above the horizon, and Lauren left the plane to sit on the ridge, to watch what was possibly her final sunrise. She warmed her hands with the sunlight and watched it carefully illuminate the valley below. It's only when she started looking around that she could make out lights in a town far below. It was actually the town of Independence, but an icy wilderness of towering cliffs and a sheer granite icy face stood between her and salvation. And it was at this moment she looked up and saw a small plane fly overhead. She waved her arms as much as she possibly could, but he just didn't see her. He flew straight on past. As the plane was mostly white, she thought that she may never be found and that she too would perish on this terrible mountain. This is when she decided that she would at least try to make the trip to town. A massive 12,500 feet slope spanned below her, a hike that people with equipment and experience would think twice about traversing. But Lauren was now going to have to attempt this with pretty bad injuries, with inadequate clothing and no hiking equipment at all. Around 8 AM, her mind was made up. She said goodbye to her friends at the top of the ridge and set off on the east side of Mount Bradley. The eastern ridge of the mountain drops to an extreme 45-degree angle, sometimes steeper, and this forced Lauren to think very carefully about her descent. She was forced to walk on all fours and began a sort of what was described as spider walk, diagonally across the icy granite face. She focused on ignoring the extreme pain that she was in. She was literally punching into the ice with her bare hands, using them as ice picks, and using her boots to penetrate the crust to make toe holds. Of course, soon after Lauren had left for this insane journey, rescue pilots then spotted the plane in the snow, but they saw no signs of life. Lauren's family actually began to plan her funeral. But against all odds, she made it across the icy face to meet a 100-foot tall, dry waterfall. But this wouldn't stop her. She carefully descended and made it down to safety. As she continued her descent, due to shock and no rest, she began to have hallucinations. She apparently saw houses that turned out to be rocks. She'd see people and rush towards them filled with hope, only to find out that they were a bunch of reeds. The descent went on and on and on. A grueling 36 hours had passed since she left the airport. And on April the 27th, just after 9:30 PM, she slowly trudged into the town of Independence. But when she arrived in town, due to being covered in blood and having no teeth, people mistook her for a criminal of sorts, and she actually struggled to find help. Eventually, she arrived at the sheriff's office and she explained her story. She was amazed to discover that she had just completed a 10-mile descent on an icy mountain, followed by a 10-mile walk, all in high heels and zero equipment. Just after 10 PM, she was admitted to the Lone Pine Hospital for her injuries. She had a heavily fractured arm, but she had survived. A rescue team later found Jean's body 120 feet below the plane, while Ray's body was still hanging half outside the plane. He had died from heavy internal bleeding and hypothermia, while Jean had died from her head wound. It's crazy to think that a mere 15 feet higher, the plane would have crossed the ridgeline unharmed. Apparently, many flights have made the same mistake in that immediate vicinity. The National Transportation Safety Board ruled that the accident was caused by the pilot, who continued flight into known areas of severe turbulence. They also said that the pilot made improper in-flight decisions or lack of planning. Some reports suggest that the pilot may have been experiencing a phenomenon called altitude hypoxia, which is essentially an oxygen deficiency in the blood, caused by being at high altitudes, enough to affect the brain and other organs. Hypoxia symptoms include euphoria, headache, increased response time, and most importantly, impaired judgment. It was clear that the pilot instantly knew the mistake that he'd made. But this was a truly tragic story, and in hindsight, it was an avoidable accident. Rest in peace to Jean and Jay, who passed on that mountain. This story is also a testament to human survival. Completing a 20-mile journey in just a skirt and blouse is just insane. 3 months later, before her injuries had even healed, Lauren returned to the Sierra, hiked with her friend to below the crash site to say her final piece with the event. Lauren continues to this day to be an amazing artist, even having her art displayed in many galleries. That following year, she co-wrote an amazing book about the ordeal titled "And I Alone Survived," which I would highly recommend that you check out. If you're into true horror content, why not consider tapping that subscribe button? But as always, I hope that you were able to take something away from this video. Go out for that meal, say hello to that stranger that you see every day. Live life to the very fullest, because you never truly know when it's going to end. But I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.